I never wanted this job. Working the overnight shift at a gas station on the outskirts of town wasn't exactly a dream come true. But when bills started piling up and my options ran thin, I didn't have much of a choice. The station sat along a desolate stretch of highway, bordered by a thick forest that seemed to swallow up all traces of civilization. During the day, it was just another stop for weary travelers. But at night, it became something else entirely. I had been warned by my predecessor, an old-timer named Frank, that the night shift had its quirks. At first, I assumed he was talking about the occasional drunk stumbling in or a late-night rush of truckers. But the way he looked at me before handing over the keys, his fingers lingering, his eyes dark with something unspoken, left me uneasy. "Just stick to the routine," Frank muttered before he left. "And whatever you do, don't look too long into the trees." I laughed it off. Now, I wish I hadn't. The first few nights were uneventful. Boring, even. I sat behind the counter, scrolling through my phone, waiting for time to pass. Occasionally, a car would pull in, headlights slicing through the darkness, the hum of the fuel pump breaking the silence. But more often than not, I was alone, save for the rhythmic buzzing of the fluorescent lights overhead. It wasn't until my fourth shift that I noticed something strange. At around 2 a.m., I stepped outside to stretch my legs. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The highway was empty, stretching out in both directions, an endless void of asphalt and flickering streetlights. But it was the woods that caught my attention. A feeling crept over me, a slow, crawling sensation, like unseen eyes tracing my movements. The trees stood tall and unmoving, their skeletal branches forming a jagged silhouette against the starless sky. I squinted, trying to shake the paranoia, but something wasn't right. Then, I saw it. A figure. Just beyond the tree line. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the wind-swayed branches. But no, this was something else. It was tall, unnaturally so, its form blending seamlessly with the darkness. It didn't move, didn't sway like the trees around it. It only watched. A chill ran down my spine. I blinked, and it was gone. I rushed back inside, locking the door behind me. My heart pounded against my ribs, my breath coming in shallow gasps. It had to be my imagination. Maybe I was just tired, my mind playing tricks on me. That's what I told myself, anyway. But the feeling didn't go away. Hours passed, and every so often, I would catch glimpses of something, just at the edge of my vision. A flicker of movement beyond the glass, a shifting shadow where there shouldn't be one. The sense of being watched burrowed deep into my bones, gnawing at me until I could barely sit still. At 4 a.m., the station phone rang. The sound nearly made me jump out of my skin. No one ever called this late. With hesitant fingers, I picked up. "Hello." My voice was barely a whisper. Silence. Then, a faint rustling sound, like wind through leaves. My stomach twisted. Who is this? More silence. And then, just before the line went dead, a voice. Low, distorted, almost inhuman. "Why did you look?" The dial tone droned in my ear. I dropped the phone, my hands trembling. My entire body was frozen in place, every instinct screaming at me to leave, to get in my car and drive as far away as possible. But I didn't. Because when I turned toward the glass front of the station, I saw it again. Standing just beyond the light. Closer this time. Watching. Waiting. I couldn't move. The figure stood just beyond the edge of the station's fluorescent glow, half shrouded in darkness. Its silhouette was tall, unnaturally thin, its limbs just a little too long. I couldn't make out its face, if it even had one. It didn't shift, didn't breathe. It only stood there, watching. My pulse pounded in my ears. I took a step back, nearly stumbling over the chair behind the counter. My mind screamed at me to run, to do something, but my body was locked in place. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. No movement, no sound, just a gone. I staggered backward, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to force away the panic clawing at my throat. When I opened them again, the glass was empty. The gas station lights flickered above me, buzzing softly. Everything looked normal. But I knew it wasn't, because I still felt it. That sensation of unseen eyes burrowing into me. That overwhelming certainty that something was still out there, just out of sight. I had to do something. I grabbed my phone and dialed Frank's number. The old man had worked this shift for years. He had to know something. Some explanation, some trick to make the fear go away. The phone rang once, twice. My fingers tightened around the receiver. Click. "Frank," I whispered. Static crackled on the other end. For a moment, I thought I heard breathing. Shallow, ragged. "And I told you not to look." The voice wasn't Frank's. A cold, distorted whisper slithered through the speaker, sending ice down my spine. Click. The call ended. I stared at the screen, my heartbeat a hammer against my ribs. My hands felt numb, my fingers trembling so hard I nearly dropped the phone. Something was very, very wrong. I needed air. I stepped outside, inhaling deep gulps of the night's crisp chill. The gas station lights cast a harsh glow against the cracked pavement, illuminating the empty pumps. Beyond them, the woods stretched like a hungry void, swallowing the edges of the world. I told myself I wouldn't look, but I did. And this time, it was closer. Standing just at the tree line. Not one, 3. Identical shapes, tall and thin, their forms barely distinguishable from the shadows around them. They stood in perfect stillness, their heads tilted ever so slightly, as if studying me. My stomach twisted. I took a shaky step back, nearly tripping over my own feet. The air around me felt thick, suffocating. A strange low hum filled my ears, a sound I couldn't quite place, vibrating deep within my skull. Then, as one, they moved. Not a step, not a lurch. Just, there 1 second, closer the next. A strangled gasp tore from my throat. I spun, sprinting inside, locking the door behind me with trembling fingers. I grabbed the heavy steel flashlight from under the counter, gripping it like a lifeline. My chest heaved with frantic breaths. I forced myself to look out the window. Nothing. The figures were gone. Only the trees remained, standing silent and undisturbed. I wasn't crazy. I knew what I saw. But the worst part? The feeling was still there. Stronger than before. They were still watching. The next few hours passed in a haze of fear and paranoia. I sat behind the counter, gripping the flashlight, jumping at every flicker of the lights, every distant rustle outside. The silence stretched, thick and unnatural. The highway remained empty. No cars. No headlights. No signs of life. Just me. And them. Waiting. At 5:45 a.m., the sun finally began to rise, its pale glow creeping over the horizon. The instant the first sliver of light touched the treetops, the sensation vanished. Like a pressure lifting from my chest. I exhaled, my body slumping with exhaustion. The gas station looked the same as it had before. The pumps, the road, the woods. But I knew better. This place wasn't normal. And something was out there. Something that only came alive at night. And I had looked right at it. Morning brought a false sense of normalcy. The sun bathed the gas station in soft golden light, making the events of the night before feel like a bad dream. But it wasn't a dream. I barely slept when I got home. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, those tall, faceless things standing at the tree line. Watching. Waiting. I thought about quitting. Thought about never stepping foot in that station again. But rent was due, and jobs were scarce. I didn't have the luxury of running. So, that night I went back. Frank was waiting for me. The old man sat on the curb by the station's entrance, a cigarette hanging from his lips. He looked rough, eyes sunken, face pale. But when he saw me, he just sighed and stood up. "You saw them." It wasn't a question. I hesitated, then nodded. Frank took a long drag of his cigarette, exhaling slowly. Thought you might. My throat was dry. What are they? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he flicked his cigarette onto the pavement and stomped it out. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "They don't have a name. Not one that matters." My stomach twisted. Frank turned to face me fully, his expression grim. "Listen, kid. There are rules to this place. Rules that keep you safe. I should have told you sooner, but I figured you'd be like the others. Leave before it got to you." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket and pressed it into my hands. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, the words scrawled in shaky ink. Rules for the night shift. Don't leave the station between 1 a.m. and sunrise. No matter what you see. No matter what you hear. Don't look into the woods for too long. If you do, they'll notice. If you see them, don't acknowledge them. Don't stare. Don't react. If the phone rings after 2 a.m., don't answer it. It's not a person on the other end. If you hear tapping on the windows, ignore it. It's not the wind. If the lights flicker more than 3 times in a row, hide behind the counter and close your eyes. Wait until it stops. Never, under any circumstances, open the back door after midnight. No matter who's knocking. I stared at the list, my hands trembling. "This isn't a joke, is it?" I whispered. Frank's face was stone. "No. It's the only thing keeping you alive." Frank didn't stay long after that. He left without another word, shuffling toward his rusted pickup and disappearing down the road. I stood there for a long time, staring at the list. My pulse pounded in my ears. I had already broken rule number 2. And now, they knew I could see them. By midnight, the gas station was empty again. The dull hum of the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The highway stretched on, lifeless. I placed the list on the counter, smoothing the worn edges. The words burned in my mind. I wouldn't break any more rules. I wouldn't look. I wouldn't answer the phone. I wouldn't. The lights flickered. Once. Twice. 3 times. My breath caught in my throat. My hands clenched into fists. Then, a 4th flicker. The station plunged into darkness. A whisper of movement outside. Something shifted. I dropped to the floor behind the counter, squeezing my eyes shut. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I could feel it, the heavy presence of something just beyond the glass. Then, a sound. Tap, tap, tap. The window. I bit my lip, squeezing my hands together so tightly my nails dug into my palms. The tapping continued. Slow. Rhythmic. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Minutes passed. Or maybe hours. Then, silence. The lights flickered back on. I slowly lifted my head, peeking over the counter. Nothing. The window was empty. The highway was silent. The woods stood still. But I knew. They were still watching. And they weren't going to stop. Morning arrived like a lifeline, but I wasn't sure I could hold on much longer. I barely slept. Every creak of my apartment, every shifting shadow, felt like an extension of the gas station, like the darkness itself was reaching for me. Frank's list sat on my bedside table. I must have read it 100 times. The rules weren't just guidelines. They were survival instructions. I had already broken rule number 2. And last night, the lights flickered 4 times. Something was changing. Something was getting closer. And I was running out of time. That night, Frank wasn't waiting for me. His truck wasn't in the parking lot. The store keys were still under the mat, just like always. But there was no sign of him. I hesitated at the door, a deep, sinking feeling settling in my gut. Frank never missed a shift. I pushed inside, flicking on the lights. The gas station hummed to life, the flickering fluorescents casting pale, sterile light over the shelves. Everything looked normal. But I knew better. I checked my phone. No messages. No missed calls. I tried calling Frank, but the line went straight to voicemail. Something wasn't right. Something wasn't right at all. By midnight, the silence became suffocating. The usual sounds of the highway, distant engines, the occasional hum of a passing truck, were gone. The world outside felt dead. The clock read 12:47 a.m. 13 minutes until the rules really mattered. I stayed behind the counter, gripping Frank's list like a lifeline. The phone sat beside me, its old rotary dial still and silent. I wouldn't break another rule. I wouldn't look. I wouldn't answer the phone. I wouldn't. Tap, tap, tap. The window. My stomach twisted. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my back against the counter. Don't look. Don't acknowledge it. The tapping came again. Louder this time. Tap, tap, tap. My breath hitched. My fingers dug into my thighs. The tapping didn't stop. Tap, tap, tap. Over. And over. And over. Faster. Louder. More frantic. And the phone rang. A sharp, jarring sound that cut through the tapping like a blade. I clamped my hands over my ears, my body trembling. The rules. Follow the rules. Don't answer. Don't listen. The phone kept ringing. The tapping grew more erratic, the sound echoing inside my skull. I wanted to scream. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence. The air felt thick, heavy, wrong. I opened my eyes. And I made a mistake. I looked. The windows were empty. The highway stretched on, lifeless. But the woods were different. Something stood there. Not 3 figures. Not 4. Dozens. A sea of tall, thin shadows stretched between the trees, their featureless faces all turned toward the station. Unmoving. Waiting. My body went rigid. My skin turned ice-cold. They had never gathered like this before. They were closer. A shiver crawled down my spine. I could hear something, a low, distorted hum vibrating through the air. I wanted to run. I wanted to hide. Then, one of them stepped forward. And it spoke. The voice was wrong. Not human. Not natural. Like 1,000 whispers layered over each other, twisting and bending in ways a throat should never allow. You broke the rules. A sharp pain lanced through my skull. I clutched my head, my knees buckling. The air around me felt electric, alive with something that shouldn't exist. The thing stepped closer. Its body twitched, limbs moving with unsettling precision. We see you now. My vision blurred. The lights inside the gas station flickered violently. And everything went black. I woke up to the sun rising. My head throbbed. My body ached. I was lying on the floor behind the counter. The station was intact. No broken glass. No sign of struggle. The only proof that anything had happened. Frank's list was gone. And outside, near the edge of the woods, a single, deep footprint pressed into the dirt. Not human. Not even close. I didn't go home that morning. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the gas station bathed in early sunlight. Everything looked normal. The pumps. The road. The trees. But I knew better. Frank's list was gone. The rules that were supposed to keep me safe had vanished. And those things knew I had broken them. They saw me now. I tried calling Frank again. Straight to voicemail. I considered driving to his house, but something in my gut told me I wouldn't find him there. People who broke the rules didn't just leave. They disappeared. I should have done the same. But I didn't. That night, I went back. The gas station felt different. The air was heavy, thick with something unseen. The silence was too complete. The usual hum of the fluorescents felt muted, like sound itself was being swallowed. I stepped behind the counter, my body tense. My eyes flickered to the clock. 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes until the rules mattered. Except there were no rules anymore. The weight of that realization sat heavy in my chest. The rules were gone, and that meant the lights flickered. Once, twice, 3 times, 4, 5. The bulbs overhead shattered, plunging the store into absolute darkness. A sound echoed through the station. Tap, tap, tap. Not at the window, at the back door. My breath caught in my throat. Rule number 7. Never open the back door after midnight. But there was no list anymore. No rules. Something wanted in. The air felt electric, charged with something unnatural. I took slow steps back, my body screaming to run. But I couldn't. Something shifted outside the door. And a voice. Not layered whispers. Not something inhuman. Frank. Kid. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. Let me in. My blood turned ice. Frank was gone. I knew that. The station was silent. Dead. Except for his voice. Please. A slow, scraping sound ran along the doorframe. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. I knew it wasn't him. And yet, I took a step forward. The knob twisted on its own. The door didn't open, but I felt it. The pressure of something on the other side. Something waiting. Then, the whispering started. A chorus of voices. Low, distorted. Some too close, others impossibly far. All saying the same thing. Let us in. My body locked up. My pulse pounded in my ears. I turned to run. But the moment I moved, the door burst open. The thing that stepped inside wasn't Frank. It had his voice, his shape, but it wasn't him. Its limbs were too long. Its head tilted too far. The face, Frank's face, was stretched into something grotesque. The mouth too wide. The eyes too dark. It took one step inside. Then another. The gas station felt smaller. The walls closed in. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. The thing grinned. We see you now. The lights flickered back on. For a split second, I saw everything. The thing in front of me. The shapes in the windows. The ones in the aisles. Dozens. No. Hundreds. They had been here all along. Waiting. Watching. The moment the lights flickered, they moved. I don't remember leaving. 1 second, I was inside. The next, I was speeding down the highway, my car swerving into the opposite lane, the gas station shrinking in my rearview mirror. The sun was rising. And the station. The station was gone. Not empty. Not abandoned. Just gone. Like it had never been there at all. I never went back. I never tried to find Frank. And the weirdest part? No one ever mentioned the gas station again. I checked the news. No reports of a missing man. No records of a station ever being there. Like it had been erased. Like it had never existed. But I know the truth. They saw me. And even now, sometimes, when the lights flicker too many times in a row, I feel them. Waiting. Watching. Smiling.